what happens when these sort of things occur is if they don't kill a lot of people, we just move on, especially when it comes to influenza, which people seem to think is just a word that means I don't feel well. Why would we want a universal vaccine? How does this work? How is a pandemic different than what we get every year? And where are we?
Whereas influenza is very unique in that it is a virus, a group of viruses. There are different kinds of influenza A, and let's just focus on influenza A, that tend to, we use the terminology drift from season to season, in that there are mutations that change it enough so that you really need to get vaccinated each year, and you try to anticipate the right match between a vaccine and the virus that will be circulating. And then every once in a while, as Michael alluded to, you have a very dramatic change, either by mutations or by evolutions from animal influenzas that jump species, recombine or what have you, and you have something that's called a shift or a real big change. That's really unique. I mean, the viral infections that we deal with, polio, smallpox, measles, et cetera, don't do that. So we're dealing with a continual moving target from season to season and the threat of a pandemic. So the title of this session is The Quest for a Universal Flu Vaccine. So when we talk about a universal flu vaccine, it really right now is an aspirational goal, in that the quest being to make a vaccine that induces a response in the body to that part of the influenza that doesn't change from season to season, from decade to decade, or even that much when you get a pandemic, with the ultimate aspirational goal of having a vaccine that you could give relatively infrequently compared to now, which you needed every year. That could be every 5 years, every 10 years, or what have you, that covers the broad array of the influenzas that we would be experiencing. So that's in a nutshell.
Why don't we blow the system up? I mean, obviously we can't just turn off the spigot on the system we have and then say, hey, everyone in the world should get this new vaccine we haven't given to anyone yet. But there must be some way that we grow vaccines mostly in eggs, the way we did in 1947.
I think it's also that we haven't had this sense of urgency.
Do we need to have lots of people die for that sense of urgency to occur?
Well, the incredible thing is that lots of people do die every year, and yet we aren't mobilizing. You know, I would have to say, to be more positive, since I can't really answer the question of why is it taking us so long, because I think it shouldn't have, and you know, there really is not a good excuse. The science has had to move forward. Gaps in the science still persist, including our understandings about you know, immune protection, in addition to understanding the nature of this particular virus, which has its complexities. Certainly part of the problem has been that it's much safer for a company to just keep doing what it's doing than to try to do something new. But it's also, I think, we haven't funded all the work that needs to be done. And on an optimistic note, there's a lot going on now, and Tony is leading efforts, and there are other efforts, Gates Foundation, the European Union Research Horizon 2020, many other activities as well.
People always say to me, why should I get a flu vaccine? And I always say 23% is better than 0%. And as far as my math goes, that is true. And I'm just sort of curious, why are we so bad at protecting ourselves from what many people consider the sort of most likely virus to cause the most damage to humanity?
And if we take that scenario that Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation funded from the Institute for Disease Modeling, that says if we had another outbreak like a pandemic virus today, what we saw in 1918, in that 6-month time period, we would have 33 million people dead. And not only that, that virus would have been seeded all around the globe. So we're still behind the gun on the tools we use to make the vaccines. We have some reasonable vaccine foundations, and we can make them better by adding adjuvants, or there are high-dose vaccines that are not fully utilized. And a lot of parts around the world don't have access to the vaccines at all. And so I think that the sense of urgency needs to be there, Michael, but also the fact that we need to leverage the tools we have, and at the same time envision what that universal flu vaccine is in a very rapid, urgent pace to get there. Right now, they're, as you said, mediocre and slow. a mediocre and fast vaccine is even better than a mediocre and slow vaccine, honestly. But
That's the American way.
But we can make better vaccines and make them faster. But $361 billion every year is our economic cost for seasonal influenza. In a pandemic, that goes into the trillions of dollars. You know, we have to take that sense of urgency, that economic cost, that societal disruption, and the lives lost into perspective to think, how do we gather this information and share it in a very targeted way to accelerate development of one of these better, faster vaccines?
There was a discussion there about this sort of cascade from communication to coordination to collaboration to convergence. And we need to sort of work our way down that pipeline to make sure that we're actually getting all the way to the end to try to bring in as much as possible to take on this problem.
And I was starting to develop some public health preparedness programs. And I went to FEMA to talk to them about doing a tabletop exercise with us around preparedness for a biological threat. And we were going to do a flu pandemic-like scenario. And they said, you know, we don't do infectious disease. We do hurricanes, we do floods, you know, earthquakes, all kinds of disasters, but, you know, disease outbreaks. And I persuaded them to participate. And it was a remarkable thing to watch them as events unfolded, realizing just how much this kind of an outbreak would undermine all of the essentials of civic life, how it would undermine their own ability to mobilize and respond to needs, and also the recognition of the economic costs and productivity costs, in addition to the medical concerns, and ultimately the loss of faith of people in government and leadership because of the failure to be able to provide vaccine in a timely way and other things.
Is that in order to make the transition from getting out of the tried and true egg growing, which we know gives us results that can be, you know, beneficial. I mean, we've done well with that, to something that has to be much better. You have to prove that this works, and then you've got to go through all of the clinical trials, phase 1s, phase 2s, phase 3, and then show that this particular product is going to be good over a period of years. That alone, if it works perfectly, is going to take a decade.
People just still don't think enough about what this really means in our daily lives and what the impacts are, even though every year we're suffering a lot of preventable death, illness, and disability.
Well, that's why I asked the dark and unpleasant question, does something really bad have to happen? I mean, it seems to me one of the curses of the public health world is if you guys do your job well, everyone goes along and they're healthy.
And they cut your funding.
Right.
At Flu Lab, our ambition is to defeat influenza. 650,000 people died last year, and they will die this year, and they will die next year. And we seek a transformative product. I think that we can absolutely, in parallel with the pursuit of an iterative process, I think in parallel we can yes and this. We need to set an ambition for the ultimate vaccine. This is broadly protective. It is once a year, or once in a lifetime. It is durable. It is for everyone on this planet. And it eliminates this annual scourge, and it eliminates the pandemic threat. We've all been talking about the need for urgency. Are we organized in the right way to make permanent progress and meet this goal? This problem, the scale of it, requires unprecedented collaboration. It requires a new model for global collaboration and dedicated leadership and an ecosystem that's willing to engage and support it.
It seems to me what we're talking about, we've all been talking about, is a kind of two-track system where we do what we've been doing because we have no choice. We're not going to ditch that system right now, but we develop something more powerful and permanent, and that requires a different kind of entity. And I'm wondering who is going to run that entity, because I don't really think the government is probably the answer.
You know, we've really been asking ourselves and our community sort of the really hard questions. Are we organized in the right way to harness the new scientific insights and this passion?
I think if there was a single focus entity in influenza, then that target and that timeline would be accelerated to bring the best science, bring together those interdisciplinary thoughts. I mean, we're in this room, we're probably vaccinologists, we're probably immunologists, we're probably working on some vaccine, made some vaccine at some point in our life, but we're not the chemical engineers or the other engineers or the anthropologists or others who bring critical insight and how you disrupt and deconstruct an age-old problem. And we've had these vaccines for 70 years. So this is an age-old construct that requires those creative chefs that come out of the kitchen and deconstruct the carrot cake and make it look like something different, but the best carrot cake you've ever eaten in your entire life. We need that for an influenza vaccine.
In case we haven't figured this out already, this is really very complicated, not only from a scientific and public health standpoint, but from a perception standpoint. So it is a perception which is a misperception that it is not a serious disease. But as Casey said, hundreds of thousands of people die of it each year, and when you get a pandemic, millions and millions of people. So we really do have a problem of how the world perceives influenza, and it's going to be very difficult to change that unless you do it from within and say, I don't care what your perception is, we're going to address the problem in a disruptive way and in an iterative way, because you do need both.
We need this moment of energy, this burst that complements everything that we've been doing for these years and collecting lots of information. This advocacy group that is single focused, that goes to Congress, goes around the world, says people are dying. The urgency, the time is now, and this group is focused on it. It is the advocacy group, that is the lobby group, it is whatever the group does, but it's got to get money from philanthropy, it's got to get money from government, it's got to not be distracted by these cycles and bureaucracy to get the job done.
One of the other complicating issues with flu is that as the human species evolved, you developed an adaptive immune system, which means that if you get exposed to something and then later on you get exposed to the same or similar thing, your body will remember it and make a good immune response. That really helps you. It saves civilization. It's very good in the immune system. With influenza, there's a thing called imprinting. People refer to it somewhat inappropriately as original antigenic sin. And if you get exposed to an H1N1 when you're an infant, every time you see any influenza, be it H3N2 or H2N2, your body is going to make a response against that, but it's going to be very distracted and it's going to go back and make H1N1. When you do get a universal flu vaccine, you're going to want to give it to 6-month-old kids.
You're going to want to give it to 6-month-old kids.
Because a universal flu vaccine, even for me at my age, is not going to be universal. It's going to call up other things that I've been exposed to.
We need, number one, this time to be different, and we also need to really organize ourselves in a way where there will be accountability for sustained action and not just response.
In the long run, over time, amortized, if the 2009 pandemic had been much more deadly, would that have ended up being a better thing for humanity?